One thing that I really wish right-wingers would get over, and this is a critique primarily of conservatism. Like, I think our camp has pretty much gotten over it, but conservatives are still hung up on this MUH Constitution stuff. At least I still have my Constitution. And, we need to really just help them get over this because it's totally counterproductive. Our enemies aren't hung up on my Constitution, right? They're going to try to subvert it and circumvent it in every way that they can. They don't believe in it. To them, it's a living document. They're not restrained by the original intent of the Constitution. To them, it's a living document that can be reinterpreted, and this is how they approach any dispute or any debate, right? They don't win arguments. The left don't win arguments. They frame the terms of debate, and that's how they move the window, by framing the terms and then inserting a bunch of emotionally and morally laden content, and then overloading repetition. And, they're not restrained by the Constitution. To them, it's a living document, which means effectively that it's a dead letter. Because a living document that can be reinterpreted to mean anything actually means nothing. And, that's how they approach any question. They're not going to respect it. They're not going to consider that it means anything. They're just going to subvert and to circumvent it in any way that they can. And so what this means is the Constitution only it only restrains conservatives. It doesn't restrain liberals. It only restrains conservatives. It doesn't protect conservatives because it doesn't restrain liberals. And it doesn't help conservatives because it only restrains conservatives. They're the only ones who believe in it. So, what good is it? Now, you also have the English Constitution, which is an unwritten constitution. So, constitution with a little c, like in the English Constitution, means the unwritten balance of powers that actually determines who can do what and why. And, we have a little c Constitution too, because the big C Constitution, its interpretation and implementation and enforcement is totally dictated by the little c Constitution, the actual balance of powers. And it's this little c Constitution that the leftists are always trying to amend. And one of the biggest ways that they amend it is through mass immigration of people who are sympathetic to their program and to their agenda because they can expect a share of the plunder. They can expect a share of the spoils. Right? So the liberals and the leftists, they're always and only addressing themselves to this little c Constitution, whether it's by flooding the nation with sympathetic immigrants or whether it's by dictating the terms of debate, by framing the argument in a way that's favorable to them, etc., so on and so forth. These are the ways that they amend the little c Constitution. All the while conservatives are obsessing about the big C Constitution, which actually means nothing to their enemies. All right? It only means anything to them. So this is tremendously counterproductive. And this hope that the big C Constitution is going to amount to anything once the nation is flooded with black and brown socialists from all over the world, who are demonstrably, way more socialist than let's say, white Americans, is just nonsense. And, the few parts of the big C Constitution that are still in effect, more or less, that's entirely because of the little c Constitution. The right to keep and bear arms. The Second Amendment. That's maybe the most... it's been abridged, it's been infringed, because it says shall not be infringed, but it has been infringed. It hasn't been totally abolished, but it's been infringed. But to the extent that that amendment is still in effect, it's only because of the 100 million American gun owners out there who are passionate about it, who know their stuff, who will study the arguments and repeat the arguments to their friends, to their family, who have guns, who own them, who train with them, who buy guns, who buy lots of ammo, who stockpile ammo, who put the Molon Lave stickers on their car, who donate money to lobby groups, etc., so on and so forth. They're willing to fight for this right, and I can only hope are willing to literally fight if and when the time comes to do so. They're not going to fight probably for any provocation less than the abolition of the Second Amendment itself. So, it's kind of a pointless right, because the only thing that the left could do to get them to exercise it in its intended fashion is to actually explicitly abolish it. And so, it's not totally useless, but it seems like that would be the only thing that they could do to invoke that martial veto, which is what it's there to protect. But the point is, to the extent that it's protected at all, it's only protected because it's exercised. Like, the writing on paper has no meaning, it has no value. Right? It's the 100 million people with the actual guns that give that right value and meaning and make it enforceable. And so that's what conservatives and right-wing people in general need to understand, is that this little c Constitution is the actual law of the land. And everything is part of this. Demographics is part of this. Culture war is part of this. Meme war is part of this. Everything is part of this little c Constitution, and that's what's really being fought over. And the leftists understand this. The liberals understand this. The conservatives, at best, they only partially understand this. And some of them get it. I used to work with a fellow who was an evangelical Christian, and he had 5 kids. Great family, model family, all that kind of stuff. But he was kind of self-conscious about it, actually, because he's like, oh man, I don't know if I'm doing enough. I only have 5 kids. All my friends have like 6, 7, 8. So he was actually a little self-conscious about it, doing more than most of us. But, that's an example of, working on the little c Constitution. Improving the balance of power for your side to prevail, by any and all means. And, that's where the battle's being fought. So, we need to get past this Constitution stuff, because it's totally pointless. Every nation in Africa has a constitution. They're almost all pretty terrible. Liberia literally has the American Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, like word for word. They adopted it. Didn't help them out any. General Buck Naked's still going to eat your beating heart to acquire your juju. That's what the Constitution means to them, apparently. It means something very different than it means to us. And that's the whole issue here. Right? Once you flood the country with these people, or others, who have very different values and very different cultures, you're going to be in a much worse spot. You're going to find it a lot harder to hang on to what you value. You're going to find it a lot harder to do things your way, the way you prefer. You're going to find it a lot harder to live the life you want. And the Muslims understand this. They create their little no-go zones. And I think this is something that libertarians don't really understand. And I didn't even really understand it when I was a libertarian. And starting to understand the Muslim question was kind of what started to snap me out of libertarianism. There were a couple of different things. But, the Muslims are able to create these little no-go zones where they can enforce their laws and their norms. And, the mainstream society can't enforce theirs. And they can expand those no-go zones. A libertarian would say, well, they're just individuals. As long as we prevent them from infringing on us, who cares if they have their own norms and even laws? Right? Well, the problem is, even if they don't do anything that's against our laws, the aggressive signaling that they can do, the minarets, the call to prayer, the very distinctive and separatist dress, that sets them apart from us, that creates a hostile signal environment for a Western person with different values, with Western values. And you just don't want to be around it. All right? And so people move out. And the value of property goes down, and so people are even more motivated to move out, before the value of their property falls further. And then, if they're willing to do stuff that is against our law, that we can punish, that's actionable, if they're willing to harass people or beat them, or, occasionally resort to terrorism, then they can create a lot more danger and hassle and risk for us. And we can go after the perpetrators. We can go after the direct perpetrators and punish them. More often it's just a slap on the wrist, especially if it's something minor. But even if it's terrorism, and those people end up life in prison or death or whatever, well, in terrorism, they're often not worried about surviving. But, Muslim cultures can generate an endless stream of desperate expendables who are willing to pay that price, and they can send those against us indefinitely until until we're willing to retaliate against the whole community. They don't have any incentive to stop it unless we're willing to retaliate collectively. Because so what if they lose a few expendables? The whole community benefits from that sacrifice. And if we're not returning the cost to the whole community, they have no incentive to stop that from happening, to stop imposing costs on us in order to derive those benefits. And then what happens? The enclaves grow. Because not only does nobody want to live in the enclave, nobody wants to live around the enclave. And so those prices are falling, and the Muslims can move in and snatch up that property. And so just respecting property norms is not enough to stop that strategy from succeeding, to stop that strategy from expanding. Just adopting an individual value. Anyway, this libertarian thing is kind of a segue. But, the libertarian approach of just enforce individual rights, just enforce individual property, not sufficient. And my point here is these people can start, and they can also affect political processes too. They can put pressure, even with only a few percent of the population, they can potentially swing elections, and that can attract pandering. They can cause violence. The Europeans are terrified of Muslim violence. That's why they countersignal Islamophobia so hard. That's why they're always saying walk on eggshells. Don't address the issue. Tiptoe around it. Right? Because they're terrified of the blowback. It doesn't have to be violent. It can even just be street protests. Or activism. Or anything that imposes costs. And the Muslims are willing to do that. They're willing to impose those costs in order to protect and advance their own interests. And so even with a very small percentage of the population, they can extract huge concessions. They can extract outsized concessions. They're appealing to that little c constitution. They're appealing to the actual balance of powers that influences who can do what and why. They're appealing to the individual and institutional incentives to influence other people's behavior, to defend them, or to give way to them, or to concede to them, or try to appease them, etc., so on and so forth. That's all the little c constitution, and they're tremendously good at it. They're tremendously effective at it. And conservatives need to start thinking in these terms. Right-wingers in general need to start thinking in these terms in order to push things back in the other direction. Because you've got both sides playing two very different games. And you've got the right side playing by a game that doesn't help them and only restrains them. That doesn't restrain their enemies. And so we need to get over this MUH Constitution stuff. And you need to help these people get over this MUH Constitution stuff. At least I still have my Constitution. Yeah, not really. No, you don't. Because it's been redefined into something else. Because you weren't paying attention to the little c Constitution that actually determines who can do what and why. And one of the things they can do is redefine what the big C Constitution means. They can reinterpret what the big C Constitution means. And if you don't stop that on the little c Constitution level, you're screwed.